This is the Rebel Author Podcast, where we talk about books, business, and occasionally bad words. Hello, Rebels, and welcome to the Rebel Author Podcast, episode 43. Today I have a special guest because I'm talking to Becca Puglisi, one of my all-time literary heroes, and we're chatting all about character occupations. It's a fascinating nerd out that we have, and we delve into the details of writing and characterization. But first, I am going to cover two questions because I missed posting the question last time. So to the question last week first, which was, which part of character creation do you find the hardest? Yanni said, I find not making them 2D or too over the top to be difficult. There are so many different sides to characters. I don't want to only show the good or only show the bad. I want them to be interesting to read, but not so complex that it confuses the reader. I completely agree, and finding the balance is difficult. I selfishly asked this question because I've decided that the next non-fiction book I write is going to be about side characters. And the reason for that is I think once I've completed that book, I'm probably going to do a really in-depth writing craft course looking at heroes, villains, side characters, protagonists, characters as a whole, story, character arc, looking at all of those good things. I say this now, but I'm in the middle of doing the prose course and it's really hard. But anyway, this is my plan. So this is one of the reasons I wanted to know about the things that you struggle with, because it will help inform what I create for you. Amy said defining their motivations is the most tricky part. She can get the wound, but then relating actions to that wound can be a bit challenging for the periphery or second motivations. April said getting all the details down. All too often, my characters only give me some of the information in scattered accounts. I completely understand stories come to me like that, so yeah, I sympathise. Lauren said, I would love a blog post or podcast on what you learned about hacking Tray into tiny pieces. I think this was in relation to last week when I explained that I'd hacked it all up and that I had learnt loads. So I am still thinking about that and what I can do and the things that I've learned. But I think I might have to get to the end of it first before I can process what like the craziness of what's happened. So the week before, I asked what 3 words described your author branding. Edwin said, I can be rebellious enough to admit I don't have an answer for this week's question. I try to have fun when I'm reaching out. My About Me even mentions our crack squad of Vorpal rabbits. I do my best to lean into my science fiction passion at every opportunity, even though that's 2 words. I also make a point to keep my outreach clean and flinch-free. Okay, some of my jokes fail at that last one. I am a Christian, but I wouldn't call what I write Christian fiction in what I see as the traditional sense of the term. Linda King said, I'm literally in the middle of trying to figure out my brand. I want to write all the things and be all the things. I get it. I understand. It is difficult to narrow it down. And funnily enough, that's one of the things that I am really deeply thinking about at the moment in terms of my fiction and where I go with that. I really feel like there are 2 parts of me. Part of me who is now obsessed with prose and what I view as beautiful prose, and that won't be the same for everybody. And then the other part of me is in love with the humour and the sarcasm and the wit that I put into the non-fiction, and I would really like to have that in my fiction too, with sassy characters and sarcasm and all of this stuff. And I'm having trouble merging the two, and I posted in my Facebook group this week asking for recommendations. So I'm going to have a peruse of some of those. And, a lot of the recommendations came back to people like Terry Pratchett, who is hilarious. I have read and loved Terry Pratchett for years, but it isn't the type of, it isn't, I find Terry Pratchett enormously funny, but I don't think Terry Pratchett has the type of beautiful prose that I am thinking about when I think of beautiful prose. And a good example of that will come in this week's book recommendation. Anyway, this is all, as you can tell, I am still mulling all of this over and not really clear what I'm trying to say in my brain. So once I figure that out, I will tell you. Matthew Goodall said, educate, inspire and entertain. Renee said, still working on branding, but snarky, down to earth, and hopefully funny or quirky. Belinda Becker said, creative, wow, this one is a tongue twister. Belinda said, creative, curator, connection. Try saying that after a few gins. And she said, well, obviously it's very clear what her words are, so can't tell I've been doing a lot of work around this area lately, haha. Val Neal said, I'm still brainstorming branding, but I think knowledge, neurodiversity and a dash of darkness. I love that. She continues to say, those are some elements that show up in my work, and so I'm going to try and work them into my brand. I love that. I absolutely love that. This week's question is, what job does your character have? So let me know in the comments, on the podcast, in the blog, all of that good stuff, or tweet me. This week's recommendation is Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor. Oh, I loved this book. So it has a trope that I'm not a huge fan of, which is insta-love, but it is explained as the story goes on why that insta-love happens. But the reason I loved this book so much, it is young adult fantasy, I should probably add. The reason I loved the book so much is the quality of the prose. We, of course, all have different preferences and likes and dislikes when it comes to prose, but I truly felt like her description was exquisite in the same way that I adore Melissa Albert who wrote the Hazelwood's Characterization, like the description from the Characterization. I know I've used her as an example on a number of occasions. So I'm probably going to do some analysis. I have about 11 gazillion sticky tabs in Daughter of Smoke and Bone, so I'm probably going to do some kind of analysis, and if and when I have, I will share that with you and the lessons I have learned. But yeah, I highly recommend this book. I know young adult fantasy isn't for everybody, but I loved it. So in personal news this week, I was delighted to be a coach on Angela Ackerman and Becca Puglisi's website recently, and I was talking about how to analyse what you read, how to teach yourself from the things that you're analysing, and I think it's called What Read More Really Means. And I was also absolutely thrilled to be on the Big Gay Author podcast. I adore Jeff and Will, and I love their podcast, and they actually have two, and I do listen to both of them, although I listen to one more than the other. But yes, it was super fun. They are amazing hosts, and yeah, so you go and listen to that podcast. I will, of course, link to all of the things that I'm talking about in the show notes. This last week has been a bit of an odd week. I think I've said this before, but I'm not very good at recognising when I'm tired, and I think I'm probably tired. I've hit a bit of a wall, and I'm agitated and unfocused and just all over the place this week. I've not got down and done the important work. I've been doing a slew of admin work. I've taken on more freelance work, which I really shouldn't do because I am so busy with the stuff that I'm trying to do myself. So I am now banning myself from doing any editing or client work other than just the core of what I need to do. So I have continued to make progress with Trey. I'm now 65% of the way through. I'm slightly disappointed because I kind of thought I would have finished because I did the first 50% in a week, but alas not. I have also been working on the Anatomy of Prose companion course, and fuck me, I just dropped my headphone. I really tried to keep this course small and tight. But The course is now 25 modules, 9 documents, and 6 bonus videos. And there's also a set of free intro videos that I want to do. So the fucking thing has mushroomed, and it's going to be several hours, I think, or at least a few hours of course materials. What does this mean? So basically, obviously, I cannot include everything from the book. So I'm trying to drill down and focus on particular areas. And I have stripped out all of the characterization stuff because, as I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, I am going to look at what I can do in terms of a really big course once I finish the side characters book. But yeah, this course will be launching around the beginning of October. So I'm just trying not to anxiety over how much I have to do in amongst finishing books and launching books between now and then. Oh, and in other exciting news, I'm going to get to meet my co-host, Daniel Wilcox, of the Next Level Author podcast next week. So on Tuesday, so before this comes out, by the time this airs, I will have already met him and we will have had a business brainstorming type day and a podcast day. So yeah, I am super excited for that this week. Listener Rebel of the Week this week is Steve Moore. Steve says, in the year 2000, I was on a 12-month round-the-world backpacking trip and found myself in Huntington Beach, LA, where my then-girlfriend's cousin owned a popular Irish bar. On some nights, celebrities were known to pop into Gallagher's bar on their way downtown LA. My girlfriend worked in the bar sometimes whilst I got some shifts greeting people on the door. One such night, we were told to expect a stream of celebrities, and though I'm not one who covets celebrity, it was pretty exciting. First arrival was the lovely Shalik O'Neill, I think that's how you say it, I have no idea, who has the biggest hands I've ever seen. Following him were several other basketball players, including the notorious Dennis Rodman. I then spotted Tommy Lee of Motley Crue, who I knew was married to the most famous woman on the planet at the time, Pamela Anderson. Now, I was a young-ish Brit who grew up watching Baywatch, no shame whatsoever. And there she was. She walked over to me just a few yards behind Tommy and she said hello. Then she started kissing me. Full on. Her feisty husband, Tommy Lee, notorious scrapper, was a mere 10 feet away and my girlfriend was somewhere inside. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him walking back towards me. Fucking hell. After at least 5 seconds, Pamela still had her face planted on mine. Tommy said, "Come on, Pammy," and she let me go, grinned and walked off. Tommy smiled at me and said, "Lucky day, huh?" and walked into the pub with Pamela fucking Anderson on his arm. Yes, my girlfriend saw it all, the moment I was accosted by Pammy. Later that night, we were invited to what I believe was Rodman's 40th birthday party at a club in LA. No, I didn't chase Pammy, but we did have a good night and left with half a dozen pilfered bottles of Dom Perignon. I suppose I could have shrugged Pammy off with her violent husband and my girlfriend nearby, but where's the fun in that? Oh, what a cracking story. I don't think we've had a celebrity rebellion yet, so that was amazing. I loved the story, and what a memory to keep to tell your grandchildren as well. If you would like to be a Rebel of the Week, please do send in your story. It can be any kind of rebellion, big, small, or somewhere in between. You can email your rebel story to rebelauthorpodcast@gmail.com or tweet me at rebelauthorpod. No new patrons this week, but a huge thank you to all of my current patrons. You help to keep the podcast running. You help to make me feel like I'm doing a good job and that you are enjoying what I do. As you know, I ran the first Patreon goal Q&A. And in Patreon, you should be able to get the link to where the live video is now stored so that you can watch the replay. And if anyone has trouble with that, just let me know, drop me an email or a message, and I will make sure you can get the link. If you would like to support the show and get access to all of the bonus essays, posts, content, and opportunities and Q&As like we just did, then you can from as little as $2 a month by visiting patreon.com/Sasha Black. And as always, that's Sasha with a C and not an S. Okay, let's get on with the show. Hello and welcome to the Rebel Author podcast. Today I am joined by a super special guest. I am joined by Becca Puglisi. Becca is an international speaker, writing coach, and best-selling author of The Emotion Thesaurus and other books for writers, including her latest, The Occupation Thesaurus, which will be available. Actually, as this airs, this has already launched, so you can go and get your hands on a copy right now. Becca's books have sold over 500,000 copies and are available in multiple languages, are sourced by US universities, and are used by novelists, screenwriters, editors, and psychologists around the world. She is passionate about learning and sharing her knowledge with others through her Writers Helping Writers blog and One Stop for Writers, a powerful online library created to help writers elevate their storytelling. And Becca is also one of a duo, a twosome, of whom Angela Ackerman has already been on the show. And I will look up the link for that episode and put it in the show notes for anybody listening who would like to go back and check out that. So thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. I'm super excited. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to just talk about writing stuff. I'm excited to not be in my house, stuck in my house. Yes, I have been for the past 6 months. You know how it goes.
Absolutely. Well, I am absolutely delighted and honoured because this is the first time we've ever had a more than email correspondence, but obviously we have been corresponding for years over. Yep. I was very honoured to be invited to be a resident writing coach in your writing program. For listeners who don't know, I do share these posts and things. And of course, even before that, Becca and Angela are still two of my absolute all-time literary heroes, because you guys taught me so much and had such a massive impact in my writing journey. So yeah, first of all, before we dive in, thanks.
Oh, please. That's so awesome. That's why we do what we do. You know, I mean, we just are always looking for, first of all, you know, what's wrong with our writing? What do we struggle with? Because we almost always see that that's a common problem for lots of people, and that's really our goal, is just to help as many people as we can with what we've learned. So that's so awesome. Thanks for sharing.
No, not at all. Thank you guys for writing your book. So okay, let's dive in then. Tell everyone a little bit more about you and your personal writing journey and how you came to where you are today.
Well, I don't have like a normal story. I wasn't one of those people who wrote things when they were little. I was fairly unimaginative as a child. I never dreamed that I would be an author. I was just married and had no kids. My husband and I had no money. We were just, you know, scraping by, and something came up. We wanted to donate to some organization. We just did not have any money. And so I literally prayed and said, all right, God, I need money. How can I make some money to give to this organization? And God very clearly said to me, write a book. And, you know, looking back, I think, okay, that's like the most ridiculous thing for God or anybody else to say when you're trying to make money. I mean, you know, it's very hard to make a living as an author, but I didn't know that. So I said, okay. And so I wrote a chapter book because I was teaching elementary school at the time. And that was what I was reading to my kids. And it was horrible, but I really loved the process. Like, I just fell in love with the process of writing and felt like I kind of had a knack for it. So I started writing. I wrote chapter books and I went to picture books, and that was way too hard. So I went to young adult books and kind of found my wheelhouse there. And I just learned, and I researched and I studied, and I felt like I was finally getting to the point where my fiction was almost there. It was, you know, good enough to probably be published. And Angela and I put out The Emotion Thesaurus, and it kind of took off. and went a little viral, and I realized, holy crap, something is happening here, and I need to pay attention to this. And so we sidelined, both of us, our fiction so that we could focus on the nonfiction. Because it was just so rewarding to hear, like you were saying, people, say to us, oh my gosh, I read your book and this light bulb went off, and my writing, I just feel like it's so much better now, and I'm achieving the goals that I've always had. So that's kind of why I am where I am today. It's just that kind of unorthodox journey. It really took like a supernatural event to get me into this line of work, but I'm super excited to be here.
I love that so much for so many different reasons. And I think the most amazing thing about your work is that it doesn't matter where you are in your writing journey, you can still get epiphanies and revelations and learn new things from your books and from your blogs. And even like the last book, the Occupation Thesaurus, I still... I class myself as a reasonably good writer now, and I was like, oh yeah, as I have like a number of revelations, I'm like, oh really, how have I missed this? But actually, that's why it's so important to be a perpetual student and to keep learning. And yeah, so are you still writing fiction in the background, or are you focused solely on the nonfiction now?
I keep trying. I keep having goals and plans, but I just don't have time. I don't have time to do, and you and I have talked a little bit about this, just with you having to make decisions about, where you're going to focus your time. We barely have time to do the things that we need to do for all the nonfiction stuff. So fiction really has taken a back seat. We're not doing a whole lot of that right now. We've just got so many other things on the go.
I 100% understand and feel the pain. And it's what the worst thing for me is the pull, because I love both equally, and I'm not satisfied by just one, which makes it doubly hard because I'm not a fast writer, and it's actually time-wise it's really bloody difficult to manage both and do both well enough that you're not doing a disservice to both. And I sort of almost feel like I could just have one rather than two, but anyway. Okay, so for anyone who hasn't heard of you guys, tell listeners a little bit more about all of the thesauri that you have, because it's not just one. It's not just the Occupation Thesaurus. Yeah, I know you've mentioned the Emotion Thesaurus, but you have a whole raft of them.
Yeah, we basically have a collection of resources to help writers with different areas of descriptive writing. The first really big lesson I learned as a writer was about showing instead of telling. I remember very clearly people had been talking about it. I had no idea what they were talking about. And a critique partner of mine explained to me what it was and why it was preferential. And then she just redid like this short little paragraph that I had done as showing. And it was like, I was just, oh my gosh, this changes everything. And I really believe that plays into so many different aspects of our writing. And when we can figure out how to show all the different elements in a really effective and efficient way, then it takes our writing to the next level. So that's kind of where Angela's and my books focus. We have a book on emotion that talks about different emotions and how to show your character's emotion. Instead of telling readers he was angry, it's how to show it through what the character's doing, what they're thinking, what's happening internally as they're feeling those feelings. And then we turned our attention to character traits, positive traits, negative traits. Where do they come from? How do they manifest? And again, how to show that your character is narcissistic or optimistic or whatever it is without you just coming right out and saying it. It's much more appealing to readers for them to see those traits in action and kind of infer those things without it being laid out on the table so directly for them. Then we looked at settings, rural and urban settings, and all the different sensory descriptions that you can use to write your settings in a multi-sensory way, which of course is going to pull readers more firmly into the experience. And then, we did a book on emotional wounds, which was,
Loved that one.
That one, I think it was the most difficult to write because it was just so heavy. And I mean, we wanted to write about things that happen in the character's past, so you know who they are in the current story that you're writing. You have to know what's happened before so that you know who they are today, and then you can figure out what they have to do in the future in order to be fulfilled and for them to complete their character arc. So we had to explore all these different traumatic events and wounding events that are real and they are based in real life. And that was, it was difficult. It was difficult to research, and we really were worried about how to present it in a way that was sensitive and not, taking these real things that people have gone through and not being careful about that. But in many ways, that one I think was one of the deepest ones, just because the more we researched, the more we realized we had to be so careful with the content and get it all right. And so it required a lot of work, but it was very rewarding to hear people say, oh my gosh, I have, this thing happened to me and you totally nailed it. I have this quality and this is what I do now. And even in our own lives, we kind of saw, oh my gosh, yes, this is why I do this. It's because this happened to me. So it's always interesting to be able to see real life and how it can cross into fiction and how to be able to mirror that. And then the latest one is the Occupation Thesaurus, which just looks at different jobs and how they can tie into different parts of the story instead of it just, picking something that's interesting or unique. The importance of picking your character's job carefully and thoughtfully, so it can strengthen the story.
I think the emotion thesaurus and the emotional wound thesaurus are the two that had probably the biggest. So there are a couple of other craft books, but of all the craft books that I've read, I think those two are two of the most significant books that have impacted my prose and helped it level up the characterization and the depth. So yeah, I rave about them at every single opportunity. But we are here today to talk about your latest thesaurus, which is the Occupation Thesaurus. And I'm trying to speak slowly so I don't get tongue-tied over that. For some reason, it's a tongue twister. So I was lucky enough to read an arc, and thank you so much for that. But your other thesauri have been focused more on broad topics, as we've said, like emotions, settings, and wounds. So what made you guys drill down into such a detailed aspect of storytelling for this one?
Well, we always have in-depth discussions when we're trying to figure out what we're going to explore next and which thesauruses we're going to turn into books. We get a lot of suggestions from people because they read our books and they like what we've done and they're like, oh, if you could just write one on, whatever. And we had a lot of people who were asking for a thesaurus surrounding jobs. And at first we were honestly kind of like, really? I'm like, what does that even look like? I mean, how deep can you go with that? But we had so many people asking for it that we thought, you know what, let's look into it and see, what we come up with. And as we started just kind of researching and brainstorming and talking about the different ways that, the ways that an occupation can say different things, we realized, oh my gosh, this is really impactful for characterization, because you don't want to ever stereotype, but certain jobs need a certain skill set, or they need a certain character trait in order for a person to be really successful. So when you say that a person is an accountant, you know that they're going to be good at math, you know that they are going to be probably somewhat structured, and obviously we want to play with those stereotypes and not end up with these cardboard characters that are all the same. But we realized this really can do a lot of the characterization work. And then we realized how it actually can tie into the story itself. And the character's job can either further the story or it can inhibit the character's growth in the story, because you may give them a job that seems very background or not, like it's not it doesn't have much significance, but as they go through the story, they're going to have to pull on things that they've learned in their job, or things that they use in their job, or people that they know in their job, in order for them to succeed and to fulfill their character arc. Or in the converse, you could give them a job that is going to hinder them, and it's going to pull up roadblocks that are going to make it harder for them to get what they're going. And as we were looking at all of this, we just realized, wow, there's so much here. I mean, we had no idea that there was so much that could surround the choice of a character's career. And that was really why we decided to move forward with it, because we realized that there are a lot of ways you can use it to tie into different elements and then to kind of pull them all together.
So I think that possibly starts to answer the next question. So I spent a long time thinking that jobs and occupations were just a throwaway addition. I just, I had a character, I picked a job, and that was that. So for those writers who are, I'm going to use the word ignorant, like me, can you talk to them specifically and tell them why occupations are so important? Because I know I will never, ever look at a character's occupation in the way that I used to ever again.
Well, again, and this is where I love my job, because everything that I find that I feel like, oh my gosh, I'm such an idiot, how did I not know? It's usually something that's universal, that so many people don't realize or just need, the switch turned on. I mentioned characterization. I think that occupations can go a long way towards helping you characterize, again, with showing instead of telling. You could go through a laundry list of your characters' personality traits and their habits and their quirks, but you can skip a lot of that just by sharing what their occupation is, or having a scene with them doing a portion of their job. They're going about their job, and through that, they're revealing personality. They're revealing likes and dislikes, intolerances or biases, and so many different things that you can show just as they're doing their job. So it obviously can do a lot to help characterize, and anything you can do to shorten the reader's learning curve in terms of them getting to know the character, then they're going to get into the story so much faster, because they feel like, they already know the character and they have this connection with them. So it obviously can characterize. We talked about how it plays into the story itself and can either help the character to achieve their goals in the story, or it can hinder them from achieving their goals, which obviously has a great purpose too. Conflict. Every scene has to have conflict. It's a huge part of successful stories, and jobs have tons of conflict surrounding them, and it comes with the territory. So you can easily pull different conflict scenarios from the character's job to meet that need in your story. Theme, you can use it to support or undergird whatever message you're trying to convey. You can use it to hint at emotional wounds, because a lot of times that can play into a character or a real person's choice of what they want to do. It's really kind of phenomenal how many different ways an occupation, the different elements that it can touch on, and it almost becomes like a thread that goes through everything and just pulls it all together and makes it much more seamless, but in a very subtle way. It's kind of genius. I mean, I'm like you. I always would choose jobs that I thought were interesting. That was kind of what I did. I mean, my first book had a glass blower in it because I just thought that was a totally cool, artistic, creative job. It had nothing to do with the story itself, and I realize now, like, what the heck? What is this? Where did it even come from? So, I mean, I think that this is just a common thing. Characterization, super important. Plot, super important. Setting is pretty important. Oh yeah, he needs a job. I'll just pick that one. But it really can do so much more.
It really can. And when we get towards the end of this interview, if I remember, I will explain to listeners the revelation that I had and the change and impact and how it's connected. But I'll do that after I've asked all the questions, so it makes sense for why I did what I did. Also, my vote is totally for a conflict thesaurus next. if there's like a poll that you're going to run, my hand is up. But I know you've been having the blogs, but I'm like, yeah, please put that one in a book.
That one is pretty popular. That one, I mean, I can't speak because we haven't talked about it. We're still in the middle of just exploring it, but yeah, we've gotten a lot of good feedback about that one.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so you guys talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs in a number of your thesauri. So can you talk about how that's important in storytelling and how it may link to a character's occupation?
Well, first of all, it's not Abraham Maslow, it's Uncle Maslow. This is Angela and I are like, I don't know if we have a book where we haven't had a section on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We just discovered really early on, it might have been when we were researching character traits and where they come from. Just as a refresher, since this is, psychology 101, and quite honestly, most of us probably don't remember a lot of what we learned in college. But it's the idea that, you have certain needs. Every human being has certain needs that have to be met. And if these needs are not being met, they become drivers, they become motivators. And they make us change our behavior so that we can fill the voids that we have. So if your physiological needs are not being met, if you have no food or no water or no shelter, you are quickly going to take steps to rectify that situation. You are going to do things that you may not normally have done in order to put those physiological needs back in place because they're super important. You also have safety and security. You have love and belonging. It's that connectedness to other people. That's going to be a big driver in helping us make decisions, esteem and recognition, and then self-fulfillment. So these are things that in basic human psychology, we know that these things become motivators for us. And the same, we believe, is really true for our characters. And if we can make our characters mirror real life as much as possible, the philosophy of, what happens to us and how we're kind of built, then readers are really going to understand our characters and they're going to connect with them more because they see themselves in our characters, even if it's on a subconscious level. So needs play, I think, a huge part in our lives and should play a really big part in our characters' lives. When you think about occupations, when you think about your own jobs that you have had in your life, they all were you made the decision to pursue a certain job for a certain reason. There was a reason behind why, you took whatever job that you had. Maybe it's because it was something fun that you were really interested in, or because your friends worked there and you wanted to hang out with your friends. People choose jobs all the time because they're looking for esteem and recognition. They want to be lauded and they want to get the accolades and they want people to look at them. People choose jobs because they're convenient and they just need a paycheck. They need to meet that physiological need. You've lost your home, you're living in your car. It doesn't matter how much money the job is going to give you. And it may not be the most fulfilling, but you're going to take it because that is going to meet that need. So very often, I do believe our needs play into that decision in our life because we know that needs impact the choices that we make, and the choice of a career or a job is a really big decision. So that is going to impact us a lot of times. And so when we can take that into account with our characters, then the job becomes, again, not something random or something, as you said, throwaway or background. It's something that is deeply connected to the character. And that is, I think, is as often as we can do that with our storytelling details, we want to do that. We want to make it meaningful. We want there to be a reason for the decisions that we make. And that's just a natural impetus behind the decisions that we make for the different jobs that we take on.
Yeah, and I've seen you. I've seen you write that sort of in and around that phrase a few times. That all the details are so important, and I can't tell you how much I agree, and how much more that's becoming salient to me, and how important it's becoming. Because I know we sort of say, as writing coaches and teachers, that all the details matter, but really, every single thing in your book should have a reason and a justification, and nothing should be throwaway, because every every item that you describe has the ability to either be symbolic or foreshadowing, or a Chekhov's gun. So yeah, like I am really, maybe that's a thesaurus, detail options. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting carried away here. But yeah, where was I? Right, okay, conflict. You've mentioned conflict a couple of times, and everybody knows that conflict is at the root of all good stories. So how can writers use their character's occupation to actually create conflict in the story?
Well, it's really, I think this is kind of the most obvious, maybe, ways that an occupation can serve your story, because we know that every scene has to have conflict. And we have to come up with different kinds of conflict. So you can't just keep having the same conflict scenario over and over. And sometimes that's a challenge. That's why we actually are doing the conflict thesaurus now at the blog, to provide different, opportunities, brainstorming ideas for different kinds of conflict. Sometimes it's hard to figure out what that should be in your scene, but a job, it just has a ton of conflict in it already. I mean, you ask people, what part of your life causes you the most stress? And 90% of the people are going to say their job. I mean, there's just so much there. So we have this whole section in the book about different kinds of conflict that you can encounter at work. There's relationship conflict. You do not work, even people who work from home do not work in isolation. There are customers, there are clients, there are service people, delivery people. I mean, there's janitors, there's all kinds of people that you come in contact with that can create conflict scenarios. You have power imbalances. You have, anywhere you have a hierarchy, there are going to be issues with the people above and the people below. There are things that are completely outside of your control, a merger, a change of ownership, an economic downturn, layoffs, just all kinds of things. Even just the threat of those things is conflict at work. So there's just a ton of different opportunities. Moral conflict is maybe my favorite one, because there's so much depth there. You go to work and you have your values and your beliefs in place. And then depending on what needs you have and what's missing in your life, your morals get tested, and very often this happens at work. Somebody who is having trouble making their bills, they may be tempted to dip into the petty cash. It's just $10. I mean, the company can afford $10. I need this, in order for my kids to eat. And just different things that because you have these really important needs that you're subconsciously trying to shore up, our morals are always being tested, our values, and that happens very, very easily at work. So to me, that's the most obvious way that the occupation can serve you, because with a very simple brainstorming session, you can come up with tons of conflict scenarios that make sense because your character is already at that workplace doing that job. You're not having to go out and create situations where that conflict can happen. It also has the different levels of conflict. There's big, huge, like life-changing conflict, getting fired, getting laid off, having a fling with a coworker, all of these things that cause major issues. And then but there's the minor, like micro level conflict that we also need in our story. We need those little agitation level things that happen. He took my stapler. I left my lunch at home, and now what am I going to do? My internet is down, and all of these things that just kind of build until something happens and the character blows up and they make a big situation out of nothing. And now they have this hole that they've got to dig themselves out of, and they've made things worse. There's just so much there for conflict at work.
Yeah, and I was sort of giggling to myself quietly because in my old job, when I used to have a day job, there was so much conflict.
I know it.
She says through gritted teeth. I used to fondly name I probably shouldn't admit this on the podcast, but I had, you know, sort of frenemies and nemesises and arch nemeses, and like genuinely these are people in my head. You know, it was a way to talk about these things with writing friends in code so that nobody ever knew who I was talking about. But so much conflict in the workplace, and I still have like emotional wounds from the conflict. The worst of all was being told my personality. I think I've said this on the podcast before, but I was told my personality was a risk to my reputation. Which,
oh, come on.
Yeah, like I literally went home and sobbed about that because my personality is me, and I just think it's hilarious because now my personality basically is my job. What runs my job. So fuck him and his nasty opinions. Anyway, right, moving swiftly onwards. This is my favorite. This is something that I am becoming more passionate about, and I'm developing a bit of an obsession for story theme. So whether or not there's something that I end up writing in the future, I don't know, but so my first series has like an overarching theme, but like it's a bit wishy-washy in each of the books, but that's just par for the course in your like writing development. But my next book that I'm writing after I finish this one, I more or less started with the theme, and this is where my obsession is coming from. Like, I think it's so important. It is the core of every story's web of connectivity. And so I'm curious on your thoughts about how you can tie a character's occupation into story theme.
I love that web of connectivity, because that really, to me, kind of describes what theme does. And it's so hard. I mean, I think this is one of like the things that people don't really learn about until they reach a certain point, because it's so daunting and it's so kind of ethereal and like, nebulous. But when the theme in a story is done right, and the symbolism and the messaging and everything is when you do it the right way, it's like the foundation for the whole story. And it's got to be subtle, but not too subtle. It's oh my gosh, it's really hard to do. So kudos to you for like making that your thing to look into and to really study and get right. Cause I think that that's hugely important.
It's funny because in my second nonfiction book, so the 10 Steps to Hero, there's a whole chapter in there called The Web of Connectivity. And as I was writing it, I was like, there is so much more here that could be explored. And that's, I think, where I ignited the obsession. And so it's funny because so many of us writers don't know what we think until we've written it. And then it like just, expands into these 7-book series or whatever, like nonfiction, Thesaurus and all of this stuff. So yeah, I do definitely think that there is a web of connectivity. It's that core of storytelling. I think it's the science of storytelling. But anyway, I'm going to stop talking. Sorry.
No. Well, it's funny because we did the same exact thing where we created a Symbolism and Motif Thesaurus that was not turned into a book. It's at One Stop for Writers. And we look at it. I probably shouldn't have said it because now people are going to go look at it and they're going to be like, this is crap. What the heck? Because we look at it and we're like, oh my gosh, we need to do so much more with this. But at the time, that's all that we knew. We had learned, we were so excited about it. And so we created this resource. And now we've learned so much more. And that's on our list, our never ending list of things to do, is to shore up and expand that thesaurus to make it kind of to include, what we've learned in the meantime. But occupations, anything can be a symbol, really, and anything can tie into your message. And occupations, some of them really do lend themselves to certain themes and thematic messages. If you're writing a theme about justice and your character's job is police work, or they're a lawyer, they're a judge, maybe they're even a social worker, they experienced injustice in their childhood and they don't want that to happen with, kids, and they want to save them from that and they want to change the system. I mean, there's so many different ways that when you identify your theme, you can give your character an occupation that is going to support that and just give you all those little boosts throughout the story that boost your theme without you having to come right out and say, this is what the story is about. I look at The Greatest Showman. I think that that's a really clear example. The theme in that movie is you do not have to be loved by everyone. Everyone doesn't have to love and accept you. But that's what the main character is trying to do throughout the whole story. That's why he becomes an entertainer, because he is craving that recognition and that esteem. But what kind of entertainer is he? He's a ringmaster at a circus. Well, that's going to guarantee that a large portion of society is not going to accept him. They're not going to give him what he's after. So it's this constant struggle between, what he wants and what he really actually needs. And you see it constantly because of his job. So that's just one example of how you can tie the occupation into the theme. And it's hard because I think most people don't plan the theme. I think they don't start with it. And so you get through the story. This has been my experience anyway. You get through the story, and after you've drafted it and you're reading through it, you're like, oh my gosh, there's my theme. I think that that's the way it's so instinctual. It's not like really obvious. And that, of course, sucks, because then you get all the way through the story and you've written everything, and then you have to go back and shore that up and kind of tie it together, and that makes the job much more difficult than if you start with the theme and identify it at the beginning. It's much, much easier, because then you can plan around it. It doesn't mean it's impossible, because my gosh, that's the way I wrote like my first 4 books.
Yeah.
But that's just the way that it works. But it really can tie directly into that if you do it carefully and you know what your theme is.
I think theme is so difficult, though, as a writer to represent, to capture, to weave in. And I think that's why so many people don't start with it. And the thing is as well, like you get told so many different things. Oh, you should start with the plot. You should start with the characters. You should start with the world building. You should start with whichever bit comes to you, whichever your natural storytelling fingers go to first. But, the point and the lesson here is you need to include all the aspects. Like, yes. No matter what happens, you have to include it all. And, if it just so happens, I can't honestly say that I will always start with theme. It's just that the story and 2 particular characters fell into my head fully formed, and the theme came with them. So I've been able to work the theme much easier, and that I think is why I was able to so quickly connect what you were saying in the occupational thesaurus to this character, which I will tell you after the next question. I know I'm not sure if I've already told you, but I'm going to tell everybody else anyway. So, same question. How do you link a character's occupation to their emotional wound or their flaw?
Well, I think that this goes back to the whole human needs situation. We have these things that have happened to us in our past. They're traumatic, they're debilitating, and we have changed our behavior to try to keep those things from happening and to try to keep us from experiencing that kind of vulnerability again. But in trying to shield ourselves, we very often void ourselves in one of those human need areas, because we're trying to keep ourselves safe, but we end up developing dysfunctional behaviors and things that keep us from being able to connect with other people or from being able to succeed in these areas where we really want to succeed. So just as human needs play into occupations, emotional wounds very much do also. They are very often a driver, again, for the decisions that we make. And I think a lot of times a character can choose an occupation because, I think it's subconscious. It's not, we don't, go around saying, well, what am I going to do for the rest of my life? Let me pick something that has to do with this really horrible thing that happened to me. It's just something, it's kind of one of those really deep, latent things that I think happens. If you've got, so I had my kids, I live in Florida, and my kids very young had swim lessons because there are pools and lakes, and there's just water everywhere here. And we went through a company called Infant Swim Resource, and they basically, they take babies really, and they teach them to roll over if they fall in the water. So my daughter was 22 months, my son was 18 months. And, you know, they would get in the water with them and they would teach them to roll over and float, and then they can scream their head off until somebody comes and gets them and they're safe in the water. It was totally money well spent. But the guy who founded that company, when he was 19 years old, he found his neighbor's toddler in the ditch, drowned. And that was such a formative, horrible situation for him that he determined he wanted to do something about childhood drowning. And the current techniques, they were not working. So he changed literally the course of his life so that he could study and research and find methods and techniques that were going to keep kids safe around water. So that's just a real example of how an emotional wound can really drive someone to want to keep people from experiencing the same thing, to want to enact justice and help people. Lots of ways that an emotional wound can determine what you're going to do with your life so that it can be a really meaningful thing that is going to keep that thing from happening to you or to other people. I think it also plays in from an avoidance standpoint. You know, a lot of times if we have an unresolved wound that we haven't dealt with, the character is going to very often, their occupation may be related in some way to that on a subconscious level. If you look at A Few Good Men, with Tom Cruise, you know, he's a lawyer in the JAG Corps. His dad was also a lawyer, the most famous trial lawyer in his time. He helped end segregation, like he's the bigwig guru, like up on the pedestal. And the character, Kathy, has a really good relationship with his dad, loves his dad, becomes a lawyer, but has never tried a case in the courtroom. All he does is plea bargain. Every case he plea bargains. It's like a big joke in the office. How many plea bargain cases is he up to? I mean, like, who does this? And it's because he's terrified of he wants to be a lawyer. He wants to be a lawyer like his dad, but he's so scared that if he does, he's never going to be able to live up to his dad's reputation. He's always going to be second best. He's never going to be able to distinguish himself. So he like picks a job that gets him as close to that as he can, but not one where he's actually going to have to test himself. So wounds, they just define, they don't define, I'm sorry. They impact us in so many different ways. And I think that absolutely can tie into a choice of an occupation.
Oh, I had goosebumps when you were telling me that story. I mean, what a horrendous, I will be thinking about that, you know, for a while, because I can't even imagine how, I can't imagine being the parents, but also I can't imagine being him. And what a wonderful human to have turned such a horrendous experience into something so positive. Because I think that's the other thing, and that's usually the difference between a hero and a villain. You know, these wounds and experiences define both characters in a way, but I know you said they don't define, but it changes that, you know, their life courses, and usually the hero will triumph in spite of the experience, whereas the villain will descend and, you know, fall into the pit of villainy because of their experience. And you know, ultimately that comes down to choice and the human choice that we make. And so yes, it isn't, they don't define them, but it comes down to their choices. But yeah, the other thing that I was going to say, I think Disney movies do theme and also like character occupation really well. And they usually tie in, like I was thinking about Cars and like the movie Cars. I think actually, is that Disney or Pixar? Anyway, Pixar. Yeah. And also Monsters, Inc. and Planes, all very good examples of films that do theme very well and also character occupations. Okay, so I am going to tell listeners, because I've been talking about this the whole time. Okay, so this story came to me as I walked past a lamppost, which is why I'm always posting lamppost pictures. It's so weird. Aww. But I know I even have, like, listeners won't be able to hear, but I have like a little mini Lego lamppost. I'm actually buying a full-on lamppost for my office as well, in memory. But anyway, this is not the point. So this story is completely unrelated to my young adult series, but I have this character called Mal, and his wound is that he lost a sibling when he was 6 or 5, 6, maybe 7, something like this. I haven't worked out all of the details, but he was very young, and he basically blames himself for this death because his mum was not very responsible, and so he always feels like he's trying to make up his whole life and save people, save everybody in his life. He tries to save everybody. So originally I had him as a barman, because that's what everybody does when they're a teenager. They work as waitresses, they work in coffee shops, they work as barmen. And that made, I just threw it away, and that was it. He was going to be a barman. And then I was reading the Occupation Thesaurus and some of the blogs that you were posting in and around the launch, and I was just like, actually, this you can connect it so much more to the theme, and I can create so much more conflict if I just pick something that plays to his wound. So what I came up with was to have him working in some kind of animal rescue, animal shelter, somewhere where his job quite literally is to save animals, but it's not like he's a doctor where he's saving people and it's an exact replication. He is saving something else without it being overt. And the way that you can create conflict is by having perhaps animals or instances where he can't save them, so that can create conflict for him, or where he has to make the choice whether or not to save animals, which obviously would then morally give him a conflict, because his values are to save everything that he possibly can. So obviously I don't want to go into too much more detail because I don't want to give loads of spoilers, but yeah, that I literally synced it up to loads of different aspects of the story, and it's completely thanks to you guys. So yeah, thank you so much.
I love hearing that. That's a really good distillation of what it can do, and really it really is just a matter of just finding the right one, and then kind of the pieces all just fall into place.
Yeah. So that's exactly what happened. All of a sudden it was all of the pennies dropped, and I was like, oh, I can connect it here and here and here and here. And I was like, oh yeah, I can never do a throwaway job ever again. Damn it. Oh, okay, right, some fun questions now. So one of my patrons asked, what was the strangest thing you ever needed to research for one of your books?
I'm not super adventurous. Angela and I joke because she's really the risk taker of the group. She's the one that has all the crazy ideas, and she comes and she's super excited about them. And I'm like, no, that doesn't happen very often, but sometimes I do have to say, come on, Ange, that is not going to work. He has great ideas. So most of the time we try to make it work. I think probably just when I was writing, maybe the Wound Thesaurus, I had to research some really awful, situations, being stalked, different scenarios for different things. One of the entries in that book is accidentally killing someone. And, one of the fields is different examples of that. And so I'm thinking, okay, well, how many different ways can you accidentally kill someone? There were times when I was writing that book when I would have to go to my husband and say, dude, if I get hit by a truck, do not take my search history for real, because this is for my book. None of this stuff am I actually curious about on a personal level. And then the negative trait thesaurus that was a little bizarre, because we were constantly reading about negative characteristics and flaws. So we had to look up, about narcissists and people who are promiscuous and people who are cruel and evil. And what was funny about that one was we had to, we would email each other and go, I think I might have this. I think this might be my problem. It's the psychology students that they start thinking they have the disorders that they're studying about, or medical students with the hypochondria. We would have to constantly say, no, you are not flaky, you are not, whatever it is, you're just fine. So that probably isn't very strange, but that was difficult and a little disturbing to have to read about.
I think that's hilarious. I'm always saying, like, never ever. I think it goes for any writer. Like, you just cannot go through their like Google search history because it's so awkward. I know I have spent a long time recently. The book I was talking about is called The Scent of Death, and basically he gets punched on the nose and then can smell how people are going to die, like the situations in which they get in the situations in which they're going to die. So I have spent like an excessive amount of time researching the smells of death, like like he just, it's really uncomfortable. Like, God forbid my son ever, and my son can read as well, so I'm always like, oh, don't look at my computer, lock it down. But yeah, the things we search. I have one more patron question. So this patron says, I don't believe you guys, as in you and Angela, live close to one another. So how did you come to a collaboration where it seems like you guys are so close, it's almost like you're in the same office every day? Your working relationship is so seamless. So I guess they're wondering how you guys manage that, or how did it come to be?
Well, we are very far apart. I'm in South Florida, which is like this as far south as you can get in the United States, and she's in Canada. And I mean, I always say that she's somewhere in the Arctic Circle, even though it's not true, but it seems like it. I mean, when she's posting pictures of snow in May and crazy things like that. But we both started writing at the same time, and we both went to critiquecircle.com, which is an online critique group. You go and you can share portions of your story, and people read it and they tell you what they think, and you get points for critiquing people's work, and then you can post yours. And it's a really actually great site for people who are looking for critique partners. And maybe you don't have a group in your area, or you don't really want to do it, face to face. It's a really good group. But that's where we met. We managed, again, this is where I swear God comes into the whole thing. But we managed to meet, there's thousands and thousands of people on there, all different genres, different places. We ended up in the same, somehow we found each other's work, read each other's work, loved each other's fiction. So we became critique partners. We did that for, I think 4 years. Different partners came and went and joined our group, but it was Angela and I were just the ones that stuck together. And then I got pregnant and I was going to have my first child. And so I was going to take a break from writing because I knew that I wasn't going to be able to, focus. And I really think that may have been the end of my writing career, because I know how I am, and it's hard for me to split my passions and to focus on different things. And so I know I would have been just all about being a mom and all of that. I was 6 months pregnant, and Angela sent me an email and said, if we're ever going to sell our fiction books, we have to have an online presence. And so I am going to start a blog, and I think you should do it with me, because it would be so much easier for us to do it together. We could split the work and everything else. And I was like, dang it, she's totally right. I mean, I was totally not in a mind space I was huge, and my whole life was about to be upside down, but it was totally the right choice. So we started the blog. It was called The Bookshelf Muse at that time, and it's since become Writers Helping Writers. And then we went from there. So we've really been together since 2004 in some capacity. We started the blog in 2008. We published our first book in 2012. And honestly, part of our seeming seamlessness is we just are incredibly complementary. Her strengths balance out my weaknesses, and vice versa. And we each have a really strong respect for each other. That's kind of the foundation of our relationship, is that we have to have mutual respect. We respect each other's time. We are careful in the way that we say things. If somebody is really busy and something happens and they can't work as much, then the other person picks up the slack. I mean, that's just kind of been the way that we have always done things. In terms of our writing seeming, we often hear people say, well, your books sound like one person wrote it. It doesn't sound like two different people writing with two different styles. And with that, we really do have very different styles, but we split up the work. We each write half of it. We swap it. We edit the other person's half. And then we swap again and we edit again. So through that process of kind of tweaking and rewriting and rephrasing things, it all ends up with our fingerprints on all of it. And that's really how we co-write. It's worked out really, really well for us.
I find collaboration and co-writing deeply fascinating because I've always been like, even when I was in the corporate world, I struggled to work in a team. I'm very much like a loner. I've always
do it myself.
Yeah, like it's terrible. Like my wife as well, she is such a team player. She is the exact opposite of me when it comes, and for her, team at work is just the pinnacle of importance. Whereas I always used to get frustrated with people and just, be like, oh, I'm just going to do it myself because it's quicker or whatever. But more and more, like this is the most ridiculous, ironic thing because, I came to writing to work for myself and just do stuff on my own. And actually, the deeper and longer I'm in this bloody industry, the more I'm like, I keep starting all these collaborations and doing things with other people. And now I co-host a podcast, and I am almost certain we are going to venture into several other business streams together. And I've co-written books now, and it's just it's irony for you, but I'm fascinated by like the voice and just the relationships and how people work together, and how lucky you guys are to have found each other who, when you complement each other in such a massive way. Yeah,
it's really amazing. I mean, Angela in my relationship, I mean, she's basically my work husband. I mean, we just are, our relationship mirrors very much my relationship with my husband. I mean, we just have the same kinds of, like I said, different areas that we are strong in and different areas that we're not so good at. And we complement each other. And that's, I think the key to any collaboration is that you have to surround yourself with people who are not just like you and who do things that you can't do, because you need to do the things that you do. And my husband has this phrase that only do what only you can do. And because if everybody is trying to do everything, then, I mean, you're going to be incredibly inefficient and things are not going to get done. So it's really, really nice to have a partner who is the visionary and has the big ideas and dreams big and, comes to you with those things, and you can talk about them and figure out what's practical and what may need tweaking or what we just don't have time for, whatever. It's good. It's all good.
I love that phrase that your husband said. It reminds me a little bit of The Big Leap. I think, is it Gay Hendricks or something, or gay something anyway, and they talk about the zone of genius and like the zone of expertise and the zone of something else, and then like all of the other non-zones, but really you are at your best, and when you are in your zone of genius, I think it is. Anyway, clearly I need to go back and reread the book. Anyway, this is always my favorite question. This is the Rebel Author Podcast. So tell me about a time you unleashed your inner rebel.
Sasha, I have no answer for this question. I have been thinking and thinking. My husband, when I met my husband in college, I was part of a group at university, and we were all friends. We would all hang out, and he had these stories that were like so like far out, like things he had done and run-ins with the police and all of these different things. And we were all just kind of like, what? Who is this guy? And I swore that he was making it up because all these things don't happen like to one person. And then now that we're older and we have had kids of our own and I'm raising his children, I realized, oh my gosh, it's all totally true. Because now my kids, these things are happening to my kids. I don't know what's going on with his family. But he would share these stories. And then when we would be together and we would be sharing stories, I would be sharing stories and he would say, that's my story. Why are you telling that story? And I'm like, I don't have any stories like this. I was so like a rule follower growing up and compliant and just, follow the rules. I have very few stories of my own. But I will tell you, and this again, my husband's bad influence on me. He had this Mustang that was super souped up. It was like, blah, 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 blah. It was awesome. I loved driving it because I would pull up to red lights and people would pull up next to me and they'd be like, ring, ring, ring. Like they wanted to race me because they thought I was a woman and so I couldn't drive and I would completely blow them out of the water. It was awesome. Yeah. But he would tell me all these stories about how he would just be flying down the interstate and he would see, a police officer come and, and he would just keep going because he was going so fast that there was no way. And then he would like get off the interstate and hide behind a Wendy's and, everything's fine. And I just heard enough of these stories that I thought, I don't know what I thought, because I actually had an experience when I was driving and it was, a dark road and it was a 2-lane road. And I saw someone, I had passed a police officer on the side of the road and someone was coming. And so I flashed my lights at them to let them know, hey, there's, police officers, so don't go too fast. You don't want to get a ticket. And he flashed his lights back at me. And I thought, okay, what kind of a moron doesn't know what the flashing lights means? Clearly, there's a police officer, so be careful. So I flashed my lights at him again and he turned his lights on. And it was actually a police officer that I was like trying to flag down and let him know that there's a police officer back here. And I was mortified and I thought, oh my gosh. So he had to do a 3-point turn. I knew it was a really narrow road. And I'm just thinking, I'm hearing all these stories about my husband. And I just took off in my car.
No way.
It was not a Mustang with the boom, boom, boom. I mean, it was like a Dodge, like a piece of garbage, nothing. And Sasha, I should be in jail. I should have something. I mean, that changed the course of my whole life. Somehow I managed to not get pulled over. But when I told he was my boyfriend at the time, I was like all proud of myself, oh my gosh, I did this. And he's like, are you stupid? Do you know your car? Don't ever do that in your car again. That's crazy talk.
That is hilarious.
Wow.
That is hilarious. I love that story. I think you told us a second rebel story as well. I think you're more of a rebel than you realize, because you told me that when you were 6 months pregnant, you had all these expectations that you had of yourself, that you were, you were going to focus on just being mom and you were going to, 100% that. And you defied your own expectations. You rebelled against your expectations and you set up a power business.
I do find that my rebel moments are mostly, they're mostly brought about by other people. I like pushed or influenced into the risky, unexpected behaviors. And that's one way that Angela and I, again, are just a really good partnership, because I am much more risk averse than she is. And she kind of pushes me outside of my comfort zone and what I'm used to and what I think is, doable. And we always say that we're able to do so much more together than either one of us would ever be able to do on our own. So Amazing. It's all big.
Tell listeners where they can find out more about you, your services, and your books.
Okay, we have at our blog, writershelpingwriters.net, where there's a bookstore page that has information on all of our books. You can see descriptions there, you can see previews, and it has just purchasing information in case you're interested where they can be bought. And then we have, also at that website, we have a tools for writers page, and we have a resource for writers page that you might find helpful. But we also have a subscription-based website called One Stop for Writers it has all of our thesauruses, even the ones that have not been published in book form. So there are, I believe, 15 thesauruses at One Stop for Writers, and they're all hyperlinked and cross-referenced. We call that site a library for writers because we really feel like it's a place where you can go and sit down and have all the stuff that you need to write your story. We've got a character builder tool there to build your character from scratch. We've got story mapping tools and scene mapping tools and world building surveys, and just as much as we could think of what do we need when we write a story, what do people need, we have included it there. So that's onestopforwriters.com. You could check that out too.
Thank you so much for your time today. I cannot tell you how much I've loved geeking out for this hour. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you also to all of the show's patrons. If you would like to get early access to all of the episodes as well as a variety of bonuses, then you can do so by visiting www.patreon.com/Sasha Black. Thank you also to all of you wonderful listeners. I'm Sasha Black. You were listening to Becca Puglisi, and this was the Rebel Author Podcast. Next week, I am joined by one of my amazing writing friends and YouTube superstar, Meg Latour. We will be talking about the traditional side of publishing and how to get an agent and pursue the traditional route. So join me next week for that. Don't forget to tune in and subscribe on your podcatcher. And when you have a moment, please leave a review.